didn't know he was listening when I said stupid. I didn't know that. If I know you heard me, I would apologize. You guys are hardcore. Good night. It's almost 90 degrees. You're out here in the sun. I'll make it quick, as quickly as I can. Now, some political observers think the Tea Party is filled with people who lack culture and are uncouth. Nothing could be further than the truth in that. And just to prove it and how enlightened we are, I think it's important to begin with some poetry. There once was a congressman named Wiener who demonstrated a perverted demeanor. Forced from the hill for acting like Bill, now Congress is one wiener leaner. Henry Gibson. Now, sometimes in meetings like this, the Pledge of Allegiance is recited. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, that's the original pledge. Don't you believe in original intent? Whoops. Something missing. Yeah, that's the one that NBC and Obama uses. They are, by the way, pledging, by the way, it was written by the guy who wrote it, Francis Bellamy. This is really interesting stuff. It demonstrates how history goes full circle. In 1954, under God was added, and that's the current politically correct version, the ones you guys responded to because you are politically correct. I'd like to propose a constitutionally correct version. Here's my corrected version, a la 1787 and 2011. Indulge me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of these United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under the triune God, perfectly divisible, with God-given liberty and justice to all that acknowledge Him. Now, in the middle of the 1800s, in Europe, socialist revolutions were all over the place. It was an era of Karl Marx and Engels, socialist revolutionaries abroad and social foment at home. Many of the socialist revolutionaries were chased out of Europe just ahead of arrest in many cases, and many of them ended up right over here and landed in places of great influence. You might remember the name Edward Bellamy, latter 19th century socialist utopian who wrote an extremely popular book called Looking Backward. Sold more than 1 million copies back then. He was a social polemic. It was a social polemic advocating for an egalitarian communist state in the United States. It was a book that was later cited by secularist economist Charles Beard and John Dewey, who was the father of progressive American education, another socialist luminary, and a destroyer of the Christian public education system. As the most influential book of the 19th century, right behind Marx and Engels' Das Kapital. You might have heard of his cousin, Francis Bellamy. He was a Baptist minister. He embraced a concept known as Christian socialism. He was a follower of Christian socialism. He rejected the biblical concept of the deity of Christ, and his rejection of the deity got him tossed from the ministry, as it should have, back when Baptists had standards. Now, he was the author of the Pledge of Allegiance, and his pledge didn't contain under God, and now you know why. And he took the nationalistic view that the states were a creature of the federal government and not the other way around. He wrote the catechesis to influence the next generation after the Civil War to look to the federal government as the controlling, centralizing authority to advance his utopian socialist schemes. Always before the war, we were these United States. The constitutional language remains these United States, always plural, never singular. Example, the treason section of the Constitution, Article 3, Section 3, treason against the United States shall consist only in leveling war against them or adhering to their enemies. Triune God, God of the pledge is an all-of-the-above deity. You just heard the guy who wrote it rejected the deity of Christ. His was the God of a pagan civil religion, the inoffensive one to which we're not afraid, and one of our own making. If you really want to determine what is really the object of affection to which political conservatives or statists are loyal, and wish to gauge the spiritual temperament of the crowd, try this sometime. I pledge allegiance to the triune God, and watch their expressions. Troublemaker! Offensive, non-Christian. You're a bigot. Don't you believe in the First Amendment? What about separation of church and state? We didn't really mean that under God stuff anyway. And why do we, a lot of stuff would have to be repealed if we actually got serious about that. It's just words anyway. Why do you have to be so snickety? And you quickly find out the last thing most of the pledgers wish to do is to swear an oath to the God of the Bible. Perfectly divisible? What do you mean, Mickelson? I thought we'd settle that question with the Civil War. Well, what was settled was that one army could slaughter more people than another army. No legal issues were settled, nor can they ever be settled by coercion. The slavery argument is still used to justify unconstitutional federal power grabs. You've heard it regarding the debates over Obamacare. Where in the Constitution is the national government given jurisdiction to impose a national health care system? Nowhere. So, Amendment, the 10th Amendment, we can opt out of the state's inherent rights. Oh, that's slave. You're talking about states' rights. That's about slavery. Well, that phony charge still works on just about everybody that's not an adult. But there are a lot of Americans who refuse to grow up. Perfectly divisible? You mean you really want Iowa to become a separate country? No, of course not. I mean, we'd lose access to way too much of other people's money if we did that. Iowa, we are on the take from the feds, Social Security, Medicare, and farm subsidies, education funding, and roads. And we'd get back more from the federal government than we send them. Let's not be overwhelmed by this integrity thing. Let's just move on. Sorry. Oh, by the way, the under God part of the pledge was added in '54 in the middle of the Cold War. After President Eisenhower heard a sermon one Sunday morning about, he was asked by the pastor of that question, couldn't the people of the officially atheist Soviet Union say our current pledge with equal enthusiasm? The one without God? Within days, Congress was persuaded to add under God to the pledge. It's truly ironic, therefore, that our political class is trying to bring us back to the 50s. The Iowa Democratic Party, in their most recent party platform, calls for a return to the 1953 version of the pledge. Notice they didn't say, we don't want to be under God. They just say, we just like to return to the early version. Just like they never mention the word abortion. They just talk about women's health freedom. Just like they don't mention gay marriage. They just call for marriage equality. Or as a New York activist last week, after the same gender marriage vote, said, we have earned the right to marital happiness. Apparently in New York you can do that. Road trip. Anyhow, here again is my corrected version of the Pledge of Allegiance, against which I have no objection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of these United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under the triune God, perfectly divisible, with God-given liberty and justice for all that acknowledge Him. Amen. Now, someday, when you're feeling a little politically feisty, and in the spirit of the original Tea Party, I dare you to do that. I double dog dare you to do that. Oh, and one last thought, and remember, politicians are much like slinkies. They're perfectly useless, but fun to watch when you push them downstairs.